What's good, everybody? It's me, Tim Keys, and today I wanted to do a comparison video between Reason and Ableton. What I want to do is give a brief overview of these two DAWs and talk about both the pros and cons of each one, what makes them good to use, some things that you might bump into as a user of these DAWs, and talk about which DAW might be for who. So, getting started, Reason. I got it pulled up. There's no secret. Reason is my go-to DAW. I've used it. You see it in a lot of my videos. Reason is well known for its rack-based workflow. All of the devices that you see are going to simulate the look and the feel of rack-based instruments like you would find in a studio, professional studio, which is nice. It is going to simulate the feel of real hardware instruments. So that is the main thing that kind of makes Reason unique compared to other DAWs. Now it's fairly easy to use. Hit the wrong button. When you go into the sequencer, you have your instrument pulled up. And if you have a MIDI controller like I do, you can just start playing, hit record, and play and lay down your stuff, and then go from there and just start building the track as you want. Has the SSL emulated mixer, which means that you can mix and kind of replicate that feel, in this case of the SSL 9000 mixer, which is really good. So you can get some good, clean mixes out of this device if you know what you're doing. And yeah, you can get your stuff to sound good. Reason offers linear and, well, pretty much linear recording, working from left to right. You can kind of arrange stuff as needed. I find that to be very easy and very straightforward. However, you can also use blocks mode by, in this case, pressing B or clicking on the icon to switch to block mode. You can also go down to options and select enable block mode. This will allow you to build your songs into chunks, build parts of your songs, and you can have up to 32 blocks, and then you can just arrange those as needed. I have very rarely used blocks mode, but I know a lot of people that do like that mode and they enjoy it, and it's a very good feature. Um, One of the things that makes Reason really powerful in terms of its claim to fame is that you have this wonderful thing called the combinator. That combinator allows you to take multiple instruments and effects, and you can kind of chain these together, stacking and layering as you wish to create all sorts of interesting sounds. Now with Reason 12 update, you can kind of customize your combinator to make it look like whatever, to essentially make it its own, customizable instrument, which is really nice. You also got the player, which are, MIDI devices, which will allow you to generate chords and different things to kind of like, basically pump out MIDI and help you with, getting some inspiration if you need it. Now, Reason comes in two different versions, which is the perpetual license and the subscription. The subscription costs $20 a month. It gives you access to everything. So all these devices that you see here on the left hand side of my screen, all the way to, right here. This all comes in as part of the subscription. All the instruments, everything that you see here, all the way down to Reason Studios, minus the PX7 that's discontinued, till you get to about right there. So you have a multitude of different ways to make sounds: drums, granular synths, basses, more drums, EP keys, regular piano keys, etc. Like, there's a lot you can do in Reason, and the instruments sound really good. So the sub gets you everything. The perpetual license will get you, everything you need and then some to get started. All of these effects. Yeah, till right there, you don't get that one at the bottom. But all of these you get with standard. Same thing with utilities. And you could use these to help split audio, CV, all sorts of stuff to help, customize your instruments, get started to make some really good sounds. Also, Reason can convert audio to MIDI on a monophonic level. So if you have something like a bass line or voices, you can convert MIDI audio to MIDI. So that's a nice feature. You can also do VST support. Doesn't have VST3 yet, but you can, get a bridge, third party. You can find them, pay your fee, and then you can utilize VST3s that way, and even MIDI plugins that way as well. Now, the cons. Reason sequencer for some people may be a little bit limited. I don't have that problem. I use a MIDI controller, so for most things I need to do, I'm perfectly fine with, and I find it relatively easy to navigate most stuff. But there are a lot of people who would like to see the sequencer updated with more important features added to make the user experience a lot more usable. Some of the instruments they have been the same since Reason came out. Some people like that, some people hate that, some people might prefer an update. So that's a thing to consider. There's no VST3 support. Also, with the MIDI, you can generate MIDI a lot of different ways now, but you don't necessarily, you can modify MIDI, change the pitch, change the velocity and the length and things of that nature, change the timing. You can even explode MIDI to the track. So if you're working with a redrum or Kong, you can take all that, explode it to separate lanes to make it easier to work with. But this hasn't been updated for a very long time with the new features. So if you wanted to manipulate the MIDI that was already in here, like if you had a chord progression and you wanted to invert that chord progression, you have to play it all over, or you'd have to use one of the players and replay it in a different way. There's no option to kind of do that within the sequencer itself. Lastly, Reason. This version of Reason has been very buggy, so that's something else to keep in mind. And sorry, but this time, lastly, compared to other DAWs, Reason's update cycle is kind of slow. So that's something to keep in mind if you're using Reason. Compared to other DAWs, the update is kind of slow in terms of what they offer as you have to upgrade. Now, but this is a pro. You can use it as a VST or a DAW. So if you try it out and find that you don't like the sequencer, you can use it in another sequencer like a FL, a Cakewalk, a Cubase, Ableton, anything that supports VST3, you can run it in that. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, taking that down and going into Ableton. So Ableton is another DAW that has been around for a very long time, and Ableton has a very unique workflow. They offer you two modes of recording and arranging your music, kind of like you can in Reason. In this case, they give you the session mode, and then they give you the standard or linear mode. I personally use standard mode for right now. I've tried session mode a couple times. I'll probably go back and try it again and sit down and do like the full tutorial. But you can switch between the two if you need to. One of the things that makes Ableton really nice is its simplified workflow. So everything is kind of laid out on one screen. Your instruments, you can adjust stuff as needed. Your instruments, I'll show you what I'm talking about. So like, it's not as schizomorphic as Reason per se. So when you pull it up, that's your instrument. Everything kind of like fits together. It kind of blends in, and it's just, may offer you a more simplified way to work. It definitely has a integrated workflow. So if you have something like the Ableton push, the push 1 or the push 2, you can kind of pretty much do everything in that little box. Generate the chords and things of that nature. Push 2 will allow you the ability to kind of like sample in the push 2. You still need your computer because it's not standalone, but you can sample into it and then it'll go into your DAW, and you know, it pretty much will behave as an extension of Ableton and its own instrument, which is kind of really cool. Ableton too, I mean Ableton, one of the things I like about it is the fact that this DAW was made with DJs in mind. That was kind of its starting point, and it used to be made in partnership with Serato. So when it comes to things like tempo matching, if I'm using loops, if I got something that's at 150 BPM and I throw it in my sequencer, the my tempo is going to match to that loop. Or vice versa, if I have the sampler and I throw a loop into the sampler, it's going to match the tempo when it's in the sampler, or simpler, pardon me. It's going to match that tempo into the sequencer of my project, which is cool. So it takes a lot of the leg work that you have to do away, which makes it easier for you to focus on meshing the audio together or chopping up beats or whatever it is you need to do, which is really good. There are 4 different versions of Ableton to choose from: light, intro, standard, suite. Light is the most easily accessible version to get. It comes for free sometimes in software bundles or hardware bundles when you get something like a MIDI controller. And then suite is the most expensive. It is the most feature rich. It can handle 32-bit audio that's been imported, so there are no problems with that. So when you have the guys who make these 32-bit sounds and drum kits and things of that nature, it has no problem handling that. Some other DAWs do, but Ableton doesn't. You get Max for Live in Suite Edition. I'm going to talk about some of this stuff in Suite Edition, but I'll go back to that later. You also have the ability to convert audio to MIDI, but unlike Reason and other DAWs that also offer this feature, Ableton can do this with polyphonic audio as well as monophonic audio. So if you have a snippet of audio that has, harmony and melody combined, chord progressions, top line melody, a bass line, it'll take all of that, and for the most part, it'll convert it. There are some exceptions depending on what you feed it. Also, it might add or take away some stuff because it's trying to avoid copyright infringement. But you'll get most of the stuff that's there. So that's really useful. It's built into the DAW. You get that on standard mode as well as the Suite Edition. So that's really cool. You can also flip MIDI in the sequencer once you do a chord progression. So if I play a chord progression, I can go into the piano roll and I have the option to change it, and I can invert it horizontally or vertically and basically change the chord progression and how it plays. That's not a feature that's present in some of the other DAWs like Reason. Now, on the other hand, this is something I have to clarify and be upfront about. From version light all the way to the standard version, for the most part, Ableton only gives you a few instruments to work with, such as the drum rack. I think they give you external instrument rack. I think they give you Impulse on Ableton Light, and then they give you Simpler. So those are what you get for your instruments from Light Edition all the way to Standard. I think once you get to Standard, they now give you the drum synth, and then that's it. So you can do a lot there, but in those 3 versions of Ableton, you're pretty much going to be relying on VSTs and sample-based synthesis, which you get VST3 support. So that's really good. So it can talk to all the VSTs, so you won't have any problems there unless you put something in wrong and you have to go back and tell it where to find the VST. But it can read all of the new VSTs and VST2 support with no problems. So that's a plus. And depending on, what your needs are, that might be all you need. And then it has some good effects for, everything from the intro to standard. It has some really good effects. And again, you can expand the sounds using your VSTs. and there are a lot of VSTs out there. And Ableton is very powerful in terms of what you can do with it. Yeah, in terms of what you can do with it. They also have Max for Live. Max for Live is kind of like its own development playground, which will allow the user to expand the sound palettes and come up with customized instruments, you know, to do all sorts of cool stuff. And there's a lot that you can choose from that's free. There's a lot that you can choose from that you can buy. So, kind of like with Reason's rack extension, you could go into Max for Live and buy these third-party effects at the Ableton store to get more sounds that can, for the most part, integrate very well into your setup with Ableton. Now, here's the catch. To get everything in the box, you need to get Suite. As I said earlier, from Ableton Lite to Ableton Standard, you're only going to get a handful of stock instruments. You're going to get a lot of samples. And for you, that could be all that you need because they have some very good samples. And you can do VSTs. So that might carry you all the way through. But if you want everything else, like Max for Live, or if you want these other instruments like analog, collision, drum synth, well, I don't think drum synth, I'll take that back. But operator, sampler, tension, wavetable, you're definitely going to have to get Suite. Likewise, some of your audio effects are not present in the standard mode of Ableton. You're going to have to save up and go to Suite to get those extra ones, or you have to buy them separately if you have the standard license. So keep that in mind. If you want to have the full pull experience, you might want to get Suite. And it's worth it, in my opinion, because a standard license costs about $450 to $500. If you wanted to get Max for Live after that, it's about $200. So at that point, you're already at $650 to $700. At that point, you might as well just hash out the extra $50 to $100 and get Ableton Suite, or wait until it goes on sale. But that's something to keep in mind. To get everything, you're gonna have to get Suite, and Suite is expensive because it costs about $750 to $800. So, and not everybody just has $700 to $800 rolling around. They do have promotions and sales, so that's something to keep in mind. But likewise, the barrier to entry is a lot higher to get the Suite edition. Sheesh. What else do I want to talk about? The stock instruments, in my opinion, don't sound as good as what you find in Reason, in my opinion. In my experience, I can do a lot with programming and I can get there. It takes me a lot longer to get there with Ableton compared to using Reason. And I'll say this with Reason, when I'm using Reason, I don't have to reach for VSTs as much, and I don't necessarily have to reach for my hardware sense as much to get certain sounds that I'm looking for. I could just program certain devices, stack and layer, and boom, I got something fairly quick. In Ableton, I have to do a lot more to get the sound I like, and I find myself reaching for VSTs a lot more inside Ableton than I do in Reason. There's nothing wrong with that, and the instruments don't sound bad, but I have to do just a little bit more to get the sound that I'm looking for, and I'll reach for some of my hardware synths and my VSTs a lot more frequently to get what I'm looking for. It's not a bad thing, it is a thing. So, let's see. You might become overwhelmed with session mode or just the layout in general. As much as people love Ableton and they may jump ship from another DAW to Ableton, there are also times where I read in some of these forums where you have people that they love Ableton, or they were like, all right, I'm jumping ship from Ableton and I'm on to a different DAW. So that happens too. You have a lot of users who will use it and then switch to something else. So it depends. It's kind of, I won't say hit and miss, but some people prefer a different workflow experience. The learning curve in Ableton is a lot higher than in other DAWs because of how it does what it does. And let's see. And the piano roll. The piano roll is not, in my opinion, is not as easy to navigate through as it is in something like a FL Studio or even Reason. I think Ableton has probably more things that you can do with the MIDI in the sequencer, but I find navigating through the piano roll to be a little bit more difficult. It's definitely not FL Studio. That's okay, but that might be something to consider. All right. So, which DAW is good for who? Like anything I say, it depends on what your needs are and depending on what you're trying to do. I'd say check them both out. Ableton gives you a 90-day trial. That 90-day trial gives you access to the Suite Edition, which is everything that's included, including Max for Live. You get to use your plugins. So you get to see if you like it and, you know, work with it to create some cool sounds. Both are going to give you a lot of access to sound design. Both are going to help you get from point A to point B in your music creation. I would say manipulating audio is a lot easier, especially if you have a DJ background. You probably want to go with Ableton, just in terms of doing stuff like the tempo matching. That's a lot easier. It can read Rex files and audio and other stuff fairly easy. They do sound good. The instruments sound good. I think Wavetable sounds pretty good. Operator has some good plugins, and it's pretty powerful. And I think it leans more towards a sample-based workflow. It's really going to specialize in using samples. And I think with Ableton, depending on what your needs are, what you'll find is a lot of times you can get a lot done with one instrument. So like I got this pulled up right here. Simpler can, you know, do classic playback, one-shot mode, and slice mode all in one device. It has multiple algorithms that you can work with, including beats. It's kind of like having the best of, you know, the NN19, recycle, and, you know, some other stuff, you know, some granular effects all in one device, which is really cool. A lot of stuff is streamlined. So you might like that. But again, the price point might be a turn off, but you can always level up. You can start off with light and then upgrade over time and get to Suite, kind of like what I did. Or you can go find you a license, third party, from somebody that's selling, because you have a lot of people that sell Ableton. They'll sell that license, and so you might be able to find Suite for about $400 to $500 as opposed to $800, and do it that way. So there are options. Likewise, Reason, I think if you're someone who likes a more linear workflow, Reason might be better suited for you. I find Reason very tight to work with in a sequencer, in terms of I find it very easy to put down stuff, kind of lock things in place when I want to start moving stuff around. It's very fast for me to make a beat. It sounds good, and you get a studio rack-based workflow. So that's a plus. On the flip side, if you really want everything, you're going to have to get the subscription. They do have sales in their rack extension store. They have that. You can get access to that stuff. They have sales. So there are options there. The cons, again, you might be overwhelmed by the, you know, the layout here as well. I've heard a lot of people say like, hey, when I try to use Reasons, I was just overwhelmed by the setup. Some people don't like the rack-based workflow. They find it too schizomorphic. It's not necessarily needed. You could streamline this stuff, but it does provide a different experience. And again, no VST3 support yet. So they should be adding that on, but it's still not there yet in 2022. It's kind of a a needed deal at this point, as a lot of plugins offer VST3. Some plugins only offer VST3 support. And, you know, if you get this, you might be slow on your updates, especially when you compare it to what other DAWs can do and what they implement. So again, that's something to take into consideration. But Reason is very flexible because you can use this as a DAW or a VST. So I would say check them out. I say in terms of power overall, it kind of goes to Ableton just because it can do more right out the gate. Even with standard, you don't get as many instruments, but the things that the DAW can do with the support of different softwares that you can use and utilize, you can use the devices it has, you can use MIDI devices, MIDI VSTs, you can pretty much do everything you need within Ableton. So I would say overall power goes to Ableton. It also can do MPE support. But if you want that studio feel, and if you want good sounding sounds, go with Reason. You might not want to max for live, you might just want the combinator, and it's a nice way to do some stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I am Tim Keys. Thank you for watching this video. I'm out. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Peace.